How long have you been with us? Melody? 29 years. Is it? David Langston leaned back in his leather chair. His voice syrupy, casual, almost like he was asking about the weather. My stomach twisted into a tight, burning knot as my eyes flicked down to the manila folder sitting perfectly centered on his polished desk. In all my years at GRW Manufacturing, I had never once been summoned to a director's office on a Friday afternoon. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. 29 years and 362 days, I said, forcing a calmness into my voice I didn't feel. My hands rested carefully in my lap, every instinct screaming at me to stay composed. My name is Melody Reynolds. I'm 61 years old, and until exactly 5 minutes ago, I was the senior compliance officer at one of St. Paul's largest and most respected manufacturing companies. I had spent nearly 3 decades ensuring Grant well operated within legal parameters, documenting irregularities, standing firm when others preferred shortcuts. My pension, the milestone I had quietly worked toward my entire adult life, was set to fully vest on Monday. Just 3 days away. David smiled without warmth as he slid the folder toward me. Due to budget constraints, he said, tapping the folder lightly with one manicured finger. We're letting you go, effective immediately. For a moment, it felt like the room tilted slightly, the floor dropping out from under me. Budget constraints? Grant Well had just announced record-breaking profits last quarter. Record-breaking. This wasn't budget constraints. This was precision, calculated cruelty, dressed up in corporate speak. This is your severance package. David continued, his tone never wavering. Sign by tomorrow or forfeit all benefits. HR will escort you out. I should have felt anger, or shock, or the burning urge to protest. But instead, a strange calm settled over me. The kind that comes when the truth is so stark, so naked, that it almost feels like relief. This wasn't a random decision. It was a deliberate one. Get rid of me before my pension vested. Save the company millions, all neatly tied up with a pink slip and a pitiful severance check. I stood up, smoothing my skirt with deliberate slowness. Thank you for the opportunity, I said quietly, picking up the folder without opening it. David blinked, clearly taken aback by my lack of reaction. Maybe he had expected tears. Maybe he had expected pleading. He had no idea who he was dealing with. I walked out of his office with my head high. Janet from our, poor thing, was waiting for me outside. She couldn't quite meet my eyes as she led me back to my office to collect my things. I packed quickly, a framed photo of my late husband Thomas, the potted plant my daughter Elizabeth had given me when she left for college 15 years ago, and a small plaque commemorating my 25th anniversary at the company. I didn't need much. Most of what mattered to me couldn't fit into a cardboard box anyway. I'm so sorry, Melody, Janet whispered as I closed the flaps of the box. She glanced nervously over her shoulder where a security guard lingered by the door. It is what it is, I replied, my voice even, but inside, the truth burned cold and bright. It wasn't just wrong, it was illegal. For the past 4 years, I had been meticulously documenting financial irregularities at Grant Well. I had sent detailed memos to leadership, flagged suspicious patterns, presented evidence of backdated reports and manipulated figures. Time and again, I had been brushed aside, told to focus on more pressing matters. Every dismissal, every redirection, had been a warning I chose to file away instead of confront directly. Now I understood why. As I walked through the main lobby for the last time, the security guard awkwardly held the door for me. Have a good weekend, Mrs. Reynolds, he mumbled. I believe I will, I said, stepping out into the gray drizzle of an April afternoon in Minnesota. The drive home was a blur of familiar streets and unfamiliar emotions. I passed the cathedral where Thomas and I had exchanged vows 35 years ago. The school where Elizabeth had worn her cap and gown. Memories stacked up against each other, each one a small proof of how much of my life had been built here, and how much of it I had willingly given to a company that saw me as nothing more than a liability. When I pulled into the driveway of my modest home, I sat there for a long moment, rain tapping gently against the windshield. I thought about the nights I had stayed late to triple-check compliance logs, about the weekends cut short, the family dinners missed, The vacations postponed. All in the name of loyalty. All in the naive belief that if I just worked hard enough, if I just stayed the course, it would all pay off in the end. I made myself a cup of tea and carried it to the small office at the back of the house. I pulled back the sliding panel of the old bookcase, revealing a fireproof lockbox hidden behind framed family photos. My insurance policy. Inside, neatly filed and dated, were copies of every concerning document I had ever come across. Loan applications with falsified data. Quality control certifications backdated to cover shipments. Emails instructing junior staff to adjust quarterly figures to meet impossible revenue projections. 4 years' worth of evidence, over 1,000 pages, showing clear, systematic fraud. I hadn't collected them because I planned to use them. I had collected them because I knew. Deep down, I had always known. That night, sitting at my kitchen table surrounded by papers and memories, I made a decision. They thought they could discard me 3 days before my pension vested. They thought I would take their dirty little severance package and disappear. They were wrong. Because I wasn't just walking away. I was about to make sure that this time, finally, someone would have to listen. By the time the sun rose on Saturday morning, I had already made my decision. There would be no signing of severance papers. No quiet slipping into retirement with a bowed head. I had spent my entire career documenting facts, building cases no one wanted to see, and now, it was time to build one they couldn't ignore. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, the rich smell filling my small kitchen, grounding me. Then I opened the folder David had so graciously pushed across the desk the day before. The severance offer was worse than insulting: 3 months' salary, a gag order disguised as legal jargon, and a total forfeiture of my pension rights, all tied up in a nice little package they thought fear would make me sign without question. I set the papers aside and walked back into my office. The lockbox sat there on the desk, its heavy weight oddly comforting now. Piece by piece, I began pulling out documents, laying them carefully across the table, organizing them into timelines and patterns. Financial reports with manipulated revenue numbers, quality control backdates, internal emails showing clear awareness and willful ignorance by upper management. It was all here. They thought they were silencing a tired old woman. Instead, they had unleashed a storm they couldn't begin to control. I needed help, someone who understood not just the legal weight of what I had, but the battlefield I was about to walk into. There was only one person I trusted for this: Gregory Santos. Years ago, Gregory had been Grant Wells' CFO before leaving to work for the Securities and Exchange Commission. He had always respected my meticulous attention to detail. Even when others at the company dismissed me as overcautious, I scrolled through my contacts until his name popped up, thumb hovering for a moment before tapping the call button. He answered on the second ring. "Melody Reynolds," he said, a trace of warmth in his voice. "It's been a long time. What's going on?" I didn't waste time. "They fired me yesterday, 3 days before my pension vests." The line went quiet, then a sharp intake of breath. "Tell me everything." For the next hour, I outlined everything: the timing of my termination, the severance offer, the documents I had collected. I could almost hear the gears turning in his mind, the old sharpness that had made him one of the best auditors I'd ever worked with. "This isn't just wrongful termination," Gregory said finally. "What you're describing, it's classic whistleblower retaliation. And if the documents are half as solid as you say, Grant Wells got bigger problems than a PR scandal. Securities violations, maybe criminal charges." I exhaled slowly, a mix of fear and vindication washing through me. "What do I do next?" I asked. Gregory's voice was steady, confident, the voice of someone who knew exactly how to navigate the battlefield I was stepping onto. "Don't sign anything," he said. "Secure the documents. Make 3 sets of copies, one for the SEC, one for yourself, and one backup. Monday morning, you're meeting with my team. We're opening an official investigation." I hung up feeling steadier than I had in days. For the rest of Saturday, I worked with a clarity that surprised even me. I photocopied every document, labeling and indexing them meticulously. I prepared a timeline of when each irregularity had occurred, when I had reported them, and who had been involved in dismissing them. I created a master file so detailed it would make any investigator's job 10 times easier. While I worked, my phone rang over and over again. First it was Janet from Our. Her voice tiptoeing around panic in her voicemails. Then David himself, sounding less calm, less in control than he had the day before. Melody, we really need that signed paperwork by close of business today. Let's not complicate things. Complicate things. As if the only complication was me not quietly disappearing like they planned. By late afternoon, the messages turned sharper. The company's legal counsel left one thinly veiled threat after another. Warning of jeopardized severance and loss of opportunity if I didn't comply. At 4:30 p.m., the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw David Langston standing on my front porch, holding another manila envelope. His suit was pristine, but there was a tension in his stance that hadn't been there the day before. Melody, I know you're in there, he called, a little too loudly. This is ridiculous. Just sign the papers and we can all move on. I stood perfectly still, heart pounding, watching him without making a sound. Eventually, he shoved the envelope into my mailbox and stalked back to his shiny black sedan. The taillights flashing red as he peeled out of the driveway. I waited until he was long gone before retrieving the envelope. Inside was another copy of the severance agreement, this time with a handwritten note clipped to it. Final opportunity. Signed by 9 a.m. Monday. I smiled grimly and slid the envelope into my shredder without a second thought. That night, as the rain began to fall in slow, rhythmic taps against the windows, I called my daughter Elizabeth for our weekly catch-up. Normally we talked about small things, her job out in Denver, her 2 dogs, the garden she was trying to coax to life on her apartment balcony. But tonight, I told her the truth. I was fired yesterday, I said, keeping my voice steady. What? She gasped. Mom, they can't do that. Not now. Not after everything they did, I said simply. But don't worry, I'm handling it. There was a long pause. And then, do you need me to come home? I can be on a plane tomorrow. No, sweetheart, I said, smiling at the fierceness in her voice. Stay put. I've got this. Because the truth was, for the first time in a long while, I truly did. I wasn't just fighting for a pension anymore. I was fighting for the truth. Monday morning dawned gray and cold. The kind of Minnesota morning that seemed to press down on you. Heavy and unrelenting. But I welcomed it. The steel in the air matched the steel in my bones. Today wasn't just another day. It was the day everything would change. I dressed carefully, choosing the navy suit I reserved for occasions when I needed to remind people I wasn't to be underestimated. It wasn't about vanity. It was armor. With my briefcase packed full of documents and copies meticulously organized, I drove downtown to the Federal Building. The city looked the same, commuters rushing past, bundled in coats and scarves. Taxis honking in the misty drizzle, but for me, everything was different now. Inside the lobby, security scanned my bag and badge before ushering me upstairs. Gregory was already waiting, his frame a little stooped with the years. But his handshake was still firm, his eyes sharp. You ready? He asked. As ready as I'll ever be, I said. He led me down a long hallway lined with glass offices, the quiet murmur of bureaucratic business humming around us. Finally, we stepped into a conference room where 2 other officials were seated, Angela Brennan, a senior enforcement attorney, and James Weston, a forensic accountant whose file-stacked desk suggested a mind that missed nothing. Angela smiled warmly as I sat down. Mrs. Reynolds, thank you for coming. Before we begin, I want to make sure you understand, once you share this information, we are obligated to act on it. There's no halfway point here. I wouldn't be here if I wasn't sure. I replied evenly. She nodded. Then Gregory closed the door. And the real work began. For 3 hours, I laid everything bare. I walked them through the manipulated revenue reports, the backdated compliance certifications, the falsified loan applications. I explained how my reports had been systematically ignored, redirected, or buried after David Langston's arrival. I laid out the timeline, what I found, when I found it, and how leadership had chosen to do nothing, or worse, had encouraged it. James flipped through the documents with growing intensity, jotting down notes, highlighting figures. These aren't minor errors, he said, glancing up. They've been inflating their revenues by at least 18% over the past 2 years alone. That's securities fraud. Plain and simple. Angela leaned forward, her tone more serious. And you believe your termination was directly tied to your refusal to certify their most recent initiative? Absolutely, I said without hesitation. The timing is too precise to be coincidence. 3 days before my pension vests. After I flagged new compliance issues. They wanted me gone before I could cause more problems. The room fell silent for a beat. The weight of it all settling into the air between us. Angela finally spoke, her voice measured but firm. We'll need a formal written statement from you today. After that, the investigation becomes official. Grant Well's legal team will be notified within 48 hours. I nodded, feeling the full gravity of what I was doing, but no hesitation. I'm ready. After signing the preliminary paperwork, Gregory pulled me aside in the hallway. Brace yourself, he said. It's going to move fast. They're going to panic. I smiled grimly. Good. I wasn't even home yet when my phone started buzzing. It was Janet from Our. Her voice breathless when I finally picked up. Melody, something's happening. The board called an emergency meeting this morning. David's locked in his office. People are whispering about SEC investigators showing up. I could hear the undercurrent of fear in her voice. And for a moment, a tiny, sharp flicker of satisfaction burned through me. It's going to be okay. Janet, I said calmly, just tell the truth. She hesitated, then whispered, Did you report them? I simply told the truth. I said again, then hung up. By noon, the local business papers had caught the scent. Headlines blared about possible irregularities at Grant Well Manufacturing. Analysts speculated nervously about leadership changes and internal audits. Stocks that had climbed steadily for months began to stutter and fall. At 3 p.m., my phone rang again. This time, it was William Hargrove, the chairman of the board himself. A man who had barely acknowledged my existence during my 29 years of service. Miss Reynolds, he began, his tone strained but polite. We seem to have a situation. The board would like to meet with you. Perhaps we can resolve this before it gets unnecessarily complicated. Resolve. As if I was the complication. I kept my voice level. Polite but firm. Any discussions moving forward will need to include my attorney and representatives from the SEC. I said, I'm sure you understand. Silence crackled on the other end. Then a clipped, I see. We'll be in touch. I ended the call and stared out the window, watching the rain draw silver trails down the glass. They were scared. They should be. That night, news broke that the SEC had officially opened a case against Grant Well Manufacturing. Grant Well stock dropped another 8% overnight. Employees I hadn't heard from in years started reaching out, some whispering thanks. Others asking in hushed tones what would happen next. I didn't have all the answers yet. But I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't the one who should be afraid anymore. And this time, I wasn't backing down. By Tuesday morning, the walls were already crumbling at Grant Well. The local papers, who had first sniffed around yesterday, now ran full-blown exposés. Headlines screamed from newsstands and homepages, whistleblower allegations rock manufacturing giant. SEC investigation launched into financial misconduct. By mid-morning, the company's stock had dropped another 12%. Investors were panicking. Clients were calling. Rumors of lawsuits started swirling like autumn leaves caught in a cold wind. And the calls to my phone, the ones that had once been full of arrogance and demands, had turned into something else entirely. Apologies, please. Thinly veiled desperation. David Langston, the man who had slid that severance folder across his desk with such smug assurance just 4 days ago, had gone conspicuously silent. He wasn't responding to internal emails anymore. Janet whispered during one of her anxious calls. He wasn't showing up for meetings. He wasn't answering the board's summons. He was hiding. Good. Wednesday morning, the SEC moved fast. Gregory called to tell me they had requested formal interviews with David, the CFO, and 2 members of the board. The ones who had signed off on all those adjusted financial statements without batting an eye. The evidence you provided was airtight, Gregory said, his voice low but urgent. They know they're cornered. It's just a matter of time now. I listened quietly, feeling the strange, heavy calm settle over me again. Not triumph, not even anger, just certainty. I had spent years feeling like a small voice in a crowded room, talking, warning, pleading, while everyone else looked away. Now, finally, they had no choice but to listen. Around noon, I received an unexpected visitor. It was Janet, in person this time, standing awkwardly on my front porch, holding a small envelope. "I thought you should have this," she said, her voice trembling. Inside was a formal letter from the Grant Well Executive Committee. It rescinded my termination, retroactively reinstated me, confirmed my full pension benefits, offered, no, begged, for a meeting to discuss future opportunities within the company. As if I was going to walk back into that building and pretend none of this had happened. I set the envelope on the coffee table and looked at Janet, whose eyes were wide and glassy. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I should have said something sooner." I gave her a long look, not unkind, but not soft either. "You weren't the only one who stayed silent," I said simply. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks, and left without another word. That afternoon, the first domino fell. David Langston resigned. Officially, the statement said he was stepping down to spend more time with family. Unofficially, everyone knew the truth: he had been forced out. His resignation wasn't even enough to stop the bleeding. Within hours, 2 board members, both of whom had directly approved the falsified financial reports, quietly tendered their own resignations. The headlines grew even bolder: leadership shakeup at GRW amidst SEC probe. Whistleblower forces day of reckoning. By Friday, the pressure had reached a boiling point. Grant Well's chairman, William Hargrove, the same man who had called me days earlier, voice dripping with false calm, held a press conference. He tried to project confidence, standing stiffly behind the podium, reading a carefully sanitized statement about taking the allegations seriously and moving forward with transparency. But the panic was visible. His hands shook slightly as he shuffled his papers. His smile was tight and forced. He was a man cornered, trying desperately to keep the facade intact while the foundation crumbled under his feet. Reporters bombarded him with questions. Was Ms. Reynolds fired in retaliation for raising compliance concerns? Did the board knowingly sign off on manipulated reports? How deep does the financial misconduct go? Hargrove refused to answer directly. Instead, he repeated hollow assurances about internal reviews and learning opportunities. The public wasn't buying it. Neither was the SEC. Over the weekend, the story exploded nationally. Business journals picked it up. Major news networks ran segments titled "One Woman's Fight for Integrity." Interviews were requested. Analysts speculated openly about the legal consequences to come. And Grant Well's stock continued its freefall. By Sunday night, the company had lost nearly 30% of its value in a single week. I watched it all unfold from my living room, sipping chamomile tea, wrapped in an old quilt Thomas had loved. Not with bitterness, not with anger, just with a steady, abiding sense of peace. This wasn't vengeance. It was justice. The kind that moved slow at first, like a train gathering speed, but once it started, it became unstoppable. Late Sunday night, I got a call from Gregory. "They're asking for a settlement meeting," he said, the hint of a smile in his voice. "You have all the leverage." Melody, all of it. I leaned back, closing my eyes for a moment. Good. Because I wasn't just going to reclaim what they stole from me. I was going to make sure no one like David Langston ever thought they could do this to someone like me again. Not without consequences. Monday morning came crisp and bright. The kind of morning that usually felt too sharp against the skin after a long winter. But today, it felt like a breath of fresh air. I stood outside my attorney's office downtown, the heavy leather briefcase in my hand feeling lighter than it had in days. Gregory met me at the door, giving a small nod of encouragement as we stepped inside. Today was the settlement meeting. Grant Well's interim leadership had requested it, scrambling to mitigate the fallout that was spreading like wildfire. Investors were restless, clients were jittery, shareholders were demanding answers, and heads. Inside the conference room, the new interim CEO, Patricia Donovan, waited with 2 corporate attorneys. Gone were the slick smiles and easy arrogance I had grown so used to seeing. Today, they looked tired, humbled. Good. We got straight to it. Patricia opened by offering a formal apology on behalf of the company. She acknowledged that my termination had been handled improperly, that my concerns had merit, and that Grant deeply regretted any distress caused. Gregory let her talk. When she was done, he slid a document across the table. It outlined our terms: full reinstatement of my pension, retroactive to the day I was fired, full health insurance for life, a financial settlement equal to 5 years' salary, recognizing the retaliation I had endured, and, importantly, a public statement acknowledging my contributions to the company and affirming that my whistleblower reports had been both valid and critical. They barely hesitated. They signed. When it was done, I shook Patricia's hand, not because I forgave them, but because I understood something now. This wasn't personal anymore. This was bigger than any one betrayal. This was about setting a precedent. As we left the building, Gregory glanced sideways at me. You could have pushed for even more, he said. I got what mattered. I replied simply, my name, my dignity. The next few weeks passed in a blur of formalities and fallout. The sex investigation continued, deeper, wider, revealing a culture of misconduct that went far beyond what even I had suspected. By the time it was over, 3 more executives had resigned, and the company faced tens of millions of dollars in fines. David Langston, the architect of my downfall, faced criminal charges. Watching him walked into a courthouse on the evening news, looking small and broken in his expensive suit, was not satisfying the way I thought it might be. It was sad, in a way, not because he didn't deserve it, he did, but because so many people had chosen expediency over integrity, profit over principle. And for what? In the end, it all came crashing down anyway. One morning, I stood by the window in my kitchen, a fresh cup of coffee in my hands, watching the sun break over the neighborhood rooftops. Elizabeth called, her voice bright through the phone. Mom, she said, you won. I smiled, feeling the warmth of it spread all the way to my fingertips. It wasn't about winning, I said quietly. It was about not letting them erase me. Because that's what it always was. Wasn't it? In places like that, in rooms filled with power and ambition, it was so easy for people like me to become invisible, to become convenient casualties in someone else's climb up the ladder. But not this time. Not me. Later that week, the news broke nationally. The settlement details, the sex findings, the charges filed against former executives. Analysts on television called it a landmark case in corporate whistleblower protection. They talked about the need for stronger compliance cultures. They mentioned my name with respect. Some called me brave. Some called me relentless. I wasn't sure which one fit better. Maybe both. One afternoon, I sat with Elizabeth and my 2 grandchildren at a quiet park near my home. Watching them play under the wide Minnesota sky, I realized something I hadn't fully understood until that moment. The real reward wasn't the settlement. It wasn't the public recognition. It was this: freedom. Freedom from carrying the weight of what was wrong on my shoulders alone. Freedom from doubting myself, questioning if standing up had been worth it. Freedom from the past. Later that summer, I used part of the settlement to set up a scholarship fund for young women pursuing careers in corporate ethics and compliance. I named it after Thomas, the man who had always believed in my stubborn insistence on doing the right thing, even when it was hard, even when it cost me. And I started consulting, not for the money, but because I wanted to help other companies build systems that didn't crush voices like mine. I wasn't naive. I knew I couldn't fix everything. But I could be the crack in the dam. The reminder that some people will not be pushed aside. One evening, as the sun sank low and the lake shimmered like gold, Elizabeth asked me a question. Would you do it all again? She said softly. I looked out over the water for a long moment before answering. Yes, I said, because the truth always matters. Even when no one wants to hear it. Especially then. She nodded, understanding deeper than words could reach. As the stars blinked on overhead, I realized something else, something I wished I could have told the frightened woman sitting in that director's office months ago. Clutching a manila folder meant to silence her. You are not small. You are not invisible. And when you stand up, even if your voice shakes, even if you stand alone, you are powerful beyond measure. And they can never take that away.